thank you for the introduction. As John and Steve have both said, the rVSV-ZEBOV single-dose vaccine is currently the only vaccine recommended for reactive use during Ebola outbreaks. And the 2018 to 2020 EBD, ebolavirus disease outbreak, in the DRC is the second largest outbreak ever reported, with over 3,000 cases and over 2,000 deaths, and the 10th outbreak in the DRC. And importantly, it was also the first widespread use of the vaccine outside of a controlled trial setting. So previous studies suggest that the vaccination with the rVSV vaccine confers perfect or near perfect protection against Ebola virus disease. During the phase 3 cluster randomized ring vaccination trial, the Ebola SASAFI trial, in Guinea and Sierra Leone, efficacy was estimated to be 100%. And preliminary estimates from the 10th outbreak in the DRC estimated effectiveness to be 98%, but this was only based on data until March 2019, so after about 6 months. As both of the moderators have said, given the limited evidence, there's a clear need for more up-to-date estimates of the real-world effectiveness of the vaccine. And so the aim of this study was to estimate the effectiveness of the rVSV vaccine against Ebola virus disease using data collected during the 2018 to 2020 outbreak in the DRC. So how did we do this? So we used a test negative study design, which is an observational study based on suspected EBD cases who sought healthcare at an Ebola treatment center during the outbreak. A little bit about how the test negative design works. So in the general population, there will be some people who are vaccinated and some unvaccinated. And some of these will at some point go to Ebola treatment centers. And those who meet the criteria to be a suspected case are tested. And then vaccine effectiveness is estimated from the odds ratio of being vaccinated among the test positive individuals, so the cases, and the test negative, the controls. So obviously the data that we used for this is the data that was collected at these Ebola treatment centers, which was individual level data that includes, among a huge amount of other information, 3 key variables. So the first was obviously individuals' infection status, so either positive or negative, confirmed by PCR. The second was information about their vaccination history, so their vaccination status, whether vaccinated or unvaccinated, and the vaccination date. And both of these were self-reported by individuals. And finally, there are a number of variables describing individuals' either known or possible exposure to Ebola in the 21 days before symptom onset. And this included things like whether they had contact with an Ebola case and other exposure risk factors. So before actually being able to estimate vaccine effectiveness from this data, there are a few additional steps that we took, and I will highlight some of the key parts of this now, so bear with me before we get to the results. So the first part, we determined which individuals were eligible to kind of include in our analysis according to 4 main criteria. So the first was that they had a known infection status, so it was not missing, so it was either known to be positive or negative. Second, that they had a known vaccination status, either vaccinated or unvaccinated. Third, that they had been eligible for vaccination, and this excluded, at least for part of the outbreak, pregnant and breastfeeding women and children under 6 months who were initially, or children under 1 year actually, who were initially ineligible for vaccination before a change in the vaccination protocol. And we also included individuals from August 2018 when the outbreak started to November 2019. In total, this gave us just over 26,000 individuals who were eligible, of which 1,273 were positive for EBD. There was some missing data, and any missing data, especially the vaccination onset delays, were replaced with plausible values using a method called multivariate imputation. And this process was repeated multiple times, but we shan't go into the details. Next, we tried to ensure the same level of EVD exposure between cases and controls, since it wasn't necessary that all individuals would have had sort of exposure to EVD before arriving at the health centre. And so to do this, we restricted the analysis to individuals who, in the data, reported contact with an Ebola case. This was reported by just over half of cases and 10% of controls. Next, we matched each case to one control on 4 variables, so sex, age group, their resident health zone, and month of symptom onset, and again repeated this process multiple times. And then finally, after all of this, we estimated effectiveness using multivariable logistic regression, adjusting for these 4 matching factors as fixed effects, and then kind of the combined result from this includes kind of all the uncertainty and variation that came through in the missing data and the matching process. Okay, so finally onto the results. So our main analysis was to estimate the effectiveness of vaccination against developing ebolavirus disease after 10 days. And so the main study population that we looked at comprised individuals who were either unvaccinated or vaccinated at least 10 days before symptom onset and reported this contact with an Ebola case. The study population then in the analysis contained on average 309 cases and 309 controls as they were matched one-to-one. And we found, kind of just looking at the data itself, that vaccination at least 10 days before symptom onset was much less commonly reported among cases than controls. So on average, 5% of cases were reported as vaccinated compared to 21% of controls. Now, the exact proportion of cases and controls that are reported as vaccinated varied because of this kind of imputation of missing data and matching process. And the figure on the right shows the variation in this proportion for cases and controls. So now we present the effectiveness estimates. So we estimated that 10 days after vaccination, effectiveness against developing Ebola virus disease was 84%, with uncertainty between 70 and 92%. We found no clear difference in effectiveness according to within some subgroups, so according to sex, age, or after the change in vaccination protocol, which included some additional individuals like pregnant women, but also included a change in dose. Some of these subgroup analyses were, however, limited by sample size. For example, in children under 5, there were very few individuals that we were able to include. And this is reflected in, as you can see, the very wide uncertainty in some of these subgroup estimates. We found a very mild protective effect 3 to 9 days after vaccination, although due to, again, very wide uncertainty, this was compatible also with no effect. At least some of this uncertainty or variation in the effectiveness of the vaccine for this shorter delay could in part be attributed to differences in effectiveness between 3 and 9 days, although we really lacked the power to look at any smaller delay groups. We also carried out some sensitivity analyses to try and understand the possible impact of self-reporting of the key variables, which was individuals' vaccination history and these kind of either known or risk factors for EVD exposure. So first we considered misreporting, possible misreporting of vaccination status, which is quite complicated, but hypothetically, misreporting of this could lead to under or overestimates of effectiveness, depending on how common it was and for whom it occurred, although in general, the effect was very small. Second, we considered alternative definitions of exposure to Ebola, such as including other risk factors, such as attending funerals, or using other definitions like whether cases had been reported in either the individual's health area or health zone before symptom onset. And while each of these definitions have their own limitations, we did find that effectiveness was consistent under all of these different definitions we looked at, which shows that at least our estimates were not sensitive to the definition of EVD exposure that we used. So in summary, we found that vaccination with rVSV was highly protective against developing ebolavirus disease at least 10 days after vaccination. Although the point estimate was slightly lower than the efficacy from the trial in Guinea and Sierra Leone, our findings were consistent with these results, as well as with the expectation that effectiveness would be lower than efficacy. And although we found no clear difference in effectiveness by sex or age, further research is probably needed to understand efficacy in particularly vulnerable groups such as pregnant women or young children, where we were limited by the number of individuals we could include. I think a strength of this study is that the observational kind of test negative design allows us to estimate effectiveness from data that already existed and was collected during the outbreak. And a kind of a big benefit of this is that it allows us to confirm the effectiveness of the vaccine while avoiding kind of some of the ethical challenges of carrying out confirmatory clinical trials. Most importantly, and importantly for future outbreaks, the results show that kind of high real-world effectiveness of the vaccine, and not only out of a kind of controlled trial setting, but also used in very challenging for the very challenging environment of the Eastern DRC. So kind of overall, our findings add further evidence to support the reactive and targeted use of this vaccine during future Ebola outbreaks. So I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who contributed to this research, and also to the kind of huge number of people among partners who collected the data that made this study possible. Thanks.